Edmonton Oilers are running uncontested in the Pacific Division. It's the Pacific Division Contender Roundtable Preview.
This is the Locked On Podcast Network's 2024 NHL Season Preview. Your team every day.
Welcome to the 2024 Locked On NHL Season Preview. In this episode, we will be breaking down the best of the Pacific Division. I am Nick Zararis of Locked On Oilers. That is Chris Gawlik of Locked On Vegas Golden Knights. That is Eddie Garcia of Locked On Kings. And that is Trevor Beggs of Locked On Canucks. We'll discuss who wins the division, how many points each team gets, if any teams will fall into the bottom half of the division, and the one thing that could derail the season for everyone. The 2024 NHL Season Preview is brought to you by FanDuel, where now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial. The NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So, friends, we are here.
Friends?
Hockey season is on the horizon.
Not friends.
Friendly rivals, we'll say. Friendly rivals. We're not that far away from the start of the hockey season. So, let's get everybody in the right state of mind. Let's start getting people thinking about hockey. We know everyone wants to talk about football. We're a hockey show. We're talking about hockey. So I will naturally start this conversation by throwing it to the team that won the division last year, the Vancouver Canucks. Trevor, give me some flavor. How are the Canucks feeling? What are we thinking?
Well, I think it's, for the first time in over 10 years, fans in Vancouver are thinking this team has legitimate Stanley Cup aspirations. And Nick, it was a great series between the Canucks and the Oilers. Perhaps a Demko appearance, a Brock Besser appearance in Game 7 away from even beating the Oilers. So I think it's safe to say that for the first time in a long, long time, I hadn't hit puberty last time I said this, but the Vancouver Canucks actually have Stanley Cup aspirations. So, I think there's a lot of hope in this market. I think it's probably the beginning of the window for the Vancouver Canucks. But that being said, obviously there's some question marks in net. JT Miller, he's not getting any younger, so the window is opening for your Vancouver Canucks. But how open is this window, or how long is it going to be open for? I think that's still up for debate.
Eddie, I haven't talked to you since our playoff series in the first round. How are things handling over there in LA?
Well, great to see you again, Nick, after that playoff series. I would say that things are not very optimistic in Los Angeles right now, although I do think the Kings will be in contention for a playoff spot. General manager Rob Blake has been under fire. He's going into the final year of his contract. It would take a pretty special season, I think, to save his job. At least that's the general idea, but we shall see. There were some changes made in the offseason, perhaps an addition by subtraction with Pierre-Luc Dubois leaving Los Angeles and that ill-fated trade that Rob Blake pulled off to acquire him. There are some new faces, but no new faces that you would be very excited about, quite frankly. Some guys that are looking to prove some things, in particular, goaltender Darcy Kemper, who comes over from Washington after he lost his job with the Capitals, but he won a Stanley Cup a few seasons back. So there's hope that maybe he can recapture some magic. It's a second stint for him in LA where he was very good, but that was a while ago. So I think the Kings are looking to get into the playoffs for a fourth straight year, but if they get in, and if they do get in, are they going to do anything? That's a big question mark.
Chris, how about our friends in Vegas? You guys have been lurking around as serious contenders for a while. You finally got your cup 2 years ago. Where are you guys at now, and how do you feel about the team ahead of this season?
There's been a lot of changes. Obviously, starts with losing Jonathan Marchessault and Chandler Stevenson and Alec Martinez and Michael Amadio and Will Carrier and probably a new equipment manager, and the mascot might be changing. Besides that, it's pretty much the same thing year over year. Now, there's been a lot of change on the bright side. Players that have come in, obviously Noah Hannafin, Tomas Hertl, and there's going to be some youngsters that are going to have a chance to become everyday players like a Pavel Dorofeev. Alex Holtz acquired via trade from the New Jersey Devils, and the Golden Knights are looking to rejuvenate the career of Victor Olofsson. So there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of concerns. I could see Vegas contending for the division. I can see Vegas contending for a Stanley Cup. I can make an equal or even greater argument that Vegas is on the lower end of the Pacific, not even qualifying for the playoffs. And another year of Vegas hockey upon us is what it sounds like. This is how it is every year. You just never know.
That's the weird thing about all four of our teams. We all have serious question marks. We're all reasonable playoff teams, but at the very least, there are questions. You know, the Oilers are going to go into the season. Noah Vander Kane, Darnell Nurse may or may not start the season on time. If he does, he won't have had a full preseason or not. The Oilers are going to try and integrate 2 new defensemen, 3 forwards to their top 9. There's a lot of uncertainty there. The Canucks, their goaltending situation is up in the air, to say the least. The same thing could be said about the Kings, who are rolling with an older tandem. And Vegas, as you just said, Chris, a lot of new faces to integrate into a team in a short period of time. So as far as trying to get a handle on who we feel the best about to win this division, I think it makes sense if we all kind of make the little stump speech for our team as to why we could do this, because none of us, I don't have that strong of conviction about any of the 4 of our teams right now. They're all good, but they all have serious question marks. So the simple argument for the Oilers, man on the mission. We see this storyline every now and then where it pops up, where a team gets agonizingly close and then they fall just a smidge short, and they got the best player comes back the next season as a man on a mission. And that is the argument for the Oilers this year. They came as close as you can possibly get without winning the Stanley Cup. And now the best player in the world in the last year before he can extend what's going to be the most lucrative contract in the history of professional hockey, he's got that all weighing on him. And that's the argument for the Oilers, because it's not the defense, it's not the goaltending, it's not the bottom 6. It's McDavid supernova-ing. Chris?
What more can McDavid do? What more can he do?
There isn't. Chris, give me the argument for Vegas.
Vegas is pissed off. Mark Stone is chirping the media right now. Basically, every time Mark Stone's got a microphone in front of him, he's talking about how local national media is writing off the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously, this is a little bit of a captain speak, to say the least, trying to get everyone pumped up. Of course, some of the new players coming in. It's very interesting. Just a year removed from being a Stanley Cup champion, this team has a chip on their shoulder. They're selling the narrative that they have something to prove right now. And it's very, very odd, honestly, to me, but I understand it. Going to get the fans pumped up a little bit as well. There's been so many changes, but I guess the ultimate question is, why could the Vegas Golden Knights be the Pacific Division champion and maybe be that team to make a run for a Stanley Cup champion? It's going to come down to, first of all, chemistry. We heard so much about this at the end of last season. And then the health of the new players and the existing players. Questions in that as well. So health, chemistry, and goaltending. If all 3 of those things are going fine, then you guys can just watch the Vegas Golden Knights taking our Pacific Division championship, which would be their 3rd in 8 seasons, in case some people forgot.
Eddie?
Well, for the LA Kings, I guess it would be a bit of desperation. A team that's made the playoffs 3 years in a row, which for their franchise, frankly, is a decent accomplishment, but have been out of the playoffs in the first round each year. As you well know, Nick, it's only been 3 years in a row against the Edmonton Oilers. So, from, like I said, from the general manager on down, a general manager who's looking to save his job, there's desperation there that this year there has to be a different result, or there's going to be some changes. We do have a new head coach who can come in, hopefully, Jim Hiller, who took over as interim coach when Todd McClellan was fired, and did some nice things in a tough situation. And a guy who's never been an NHL head coach full-time before, he's getting his opportunity. So maybe desperation for him that this is his probably best chance to ever take over a team that has made the playoffs. So it's not like he's taking over a team that has been completely decimated or has lost a ton of players or is in a bad situation. So he's got an opportunity to try to improve himself. There's some players that they brought in, like a Tanner Jeannot and a Joel Edmondson, that are looking to prove something, that they still have something left in the tank. I talked about Darcy Kemper as well. And they're also trying to infuse some young players who are finally getting their chance to be full-time NHL contributors. A guy like an Alex Turcotte, who's a former first-round draft pick. So some desperation and some opportunities for some players. They add it all together, and maybe they get a shot at winning a division title, which they've only done once in their franchise history.
Trevor, how does Rick Tocchet make it happen 2 years in a row?
Well, here's the thing. When I look at our 4 teams right now, I think there's a clear-cut 1 and 2 in the division, and it's Edmonton and Vancouver. And no offense to Eddie and Chris over there, but LA and Vegas seem like a distant 3 and 4.
I hear you.
But might I remind you, heading into last season, the Oilers, the Vegas Golden Knights, and the Kings were the clear-cut front runners for the division, and the Canucks were an afterthought. And of course, they ended up winning the division. So that's safe to say. You never know. But now you look at this Canucks team, and they've made massive strides under Rick Tocchet. They finally, for the first time in a decade, seem like they know how to play defense. They got a great 1-2 punch at center. I think their forward depth is probably the best among the 4 teams here. Obviously not quite the star power of the Oilers up front, but lines 1 through 4, their depth is pretty darn good. And if Thatcher Demko does return to health and looks even somewhat like the goaltender from last season, I think the Canucks got a pretty damn good chance of repeating here.
So before we get out of our first segment, our friends over at FanDuel have, of course, put together lines for an over-under for each of our teams. These numbers we have are based on what they are at as we are recording. So these numbers may be a bit different when you watch the episode. So be sure to check. But right now, the numbers on your screen, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening, 105.5 for the Oilers, 99.5 for the Vegas Golden Knights, 96.5 for the Vancouver Canucks, and 96.5 for the LA Kings. So I'm going to whip us around. We're going to go in reverse order we just went. Trevor, over under 96.5 points for the Vancouver Canucks.
Oh, man, this seems like the easiest bet of the 3. I think the Canucks are being easily disrespected by FanDuel. I think I'd be smashing the over all day. And when I look at the cup odds, I think the Canucks are 11th or 12th in terms of cup odds, despite finishing with the 6th best record. I'd be smashing the over all day.
100% agreed with you. That the Canucks value is crazy on this board. Eddie?
Well, I will agree with that as well. If there's one bet I'm taking, it would be the Canucks as well. As for the LA Kings, they've been right around the 195 point mark each of the last 3 years. So not a surprise that I think Vegas FanDuel is hitting this kind of on the head here. But if I had to bet my money, I would probably lean towards the under on the LA Kings.
Okay. And Chris, how about Vegas?
Under. This is a good Vegas Golden Knights team, and obviously throughout the season there could be a lot of changes as far as what Kelly McCrimmon's going to do to improve this roster. But 99, I'll call it 100 points. This is not a 100-point roster due to all the turnover that I referenced, obviously, in our in the beginning of this segment. So slightly under. I think Vegas is a 95 to 98 point team this season.
And the Oilers coming in at 105.5, it feels a little high with all of the uncertainty they're going to have in their roster for the first few months of the season. But they're the betting favorite to win the Stanley Cup, and they've got the highest number in this division. To win the division, it's been about 109 points over the last 5 or 6 years. So if I think the Oilers are going to win the division, which I do, I have to say over 105.5. So we are going to take our first break on today's episode of Locked On NHL, and we will be right back. If you're like me and you are trying to salvage any bit of your summer left while the weather is still nice, get out to one last concert or one last baseball game, you have got to go check out our friends over at Game Time with some of the best features in the ticket buying experience. Things like all-in pricing, where you toggle the feature on up front and there are no surprise fees at checkouts. The seat views, if you're going to a concert, you're going to a baseball game, you want to be able to see balls and strikes at a baseball game, you want to be able to see the band if you're going to a show, get a panoramic view from the seat in your app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. And Game Time ticket coverage, where your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So, as we welcome everyone back to today's show, lots of turnover, as to be expected in the NHL, from playoff teams in particular, trying to fine-tune, make those right pieces. So, we're going to go around, we're going to talk about the biggest additions, and somebody who might be a little bit under the radar on each of our teams who could break out and make a real difference for us. Kicking things off, the Oilers made a lot of moves on July 1st. Jeff Skinner, Victor Arvidsson, they ended up having to make multiple moves to facilitate being cap compliant because they didn't really financially plan well. The biggest addition, name brand wise, is probably Jeff Skinner. Won a Calder 11 years ago now. It's crazy. Jeff Skinner is as old as he is. It makes me feel ancient, which is horrifying. But biggest addition is probably Jeff Skinner, somebody who can score 30 goals riding shotgun with Draisaitl or with McDavid, or if they even need to, can play deeper down the lineup and give the Oilers a little bit more length throughout their 1 through 9. And then as far as a breakout candidate for the Oilers, It's going to sound weird saying this about a 25-year-old who has 30 career NHL games, but it's Ty Emberson, who they're kind of banking on being a dependable NHL defenseman with no real NHL experience because they just don't have anyone else. Once you get past Ekholm and Bouchard, Nurse is dicey as to whether he's going to start the season on time. Troy Stecher, who hasn't been a full-time NHL regular on a good team in a little while. You get to Brett Kulak, who's fine as a fifth defenseman, and then you're looking at Emberson. You might be looking at a Joshua Brown. They did bring in Travis Dermott on a PTO, but there's going to be a lot of uncertainty on that back end, and they're going to need one of Emberson or Stecher to step it up. Chris, how about you?
As far as the offseason apprehensions, if you will, for the Vegas Golden Knights, we're going to start with, obviously, Victor Olofsson. Coach Bruce Cassidy has already referenced Olofsson getting a shot on that top line to hopefully rekindle that chemistry with Jack Eichel that they had back in their day with the Buffalo Sabres. Now, we're talking about a player who has been a healthy scratch for 20-plus games last year with the Buffalo Sabres, just coming on to the Vegas Golden Knights top line. Obviously, there's some concerns there. Alex Holtz, I think, is a really good find from the New Jersey Devils. Holtz did very well, I think 16 goals playing in a bottom six complementary type of role. So we'll see if his game can flourish, if you will, with the Vegas Golden Knights. Tanner Pearson has been brought in on a PTO. We'll see if he's going to help out or make this roster or not. But even though they weren't technically off-season acquisitions, Noah Hannafin, Tomas Hertl last year's trade deadline. This was a really good move by Kelly McCrimmon, not just to go for it last season, but to obviously Hertl came in with a long contract. Noah Hannafin was extended roughly a month after being traded for from the Calgary Flames. So we'll see how those situations play out, but those really are the key acquisitions coming into the 24-25 year. Obviously much more important than Holtz and Olofsson would be.
People forget how good Noah Hannafin is because he's been stuck in Calgary on some non-competitive teams. I think people are going to be very impressed when they see him a full season because you still got him, you still got Pietrangelo, you still got Shea Theodore. That Vegas defense is really coming together nicely, and they've put it together slowly. Eddie, how about you?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying, as far as what the Kings lost and what they're looking to replace, from a production standpoint, there's not a lot that they really lost from last season's team. I mentioned Pierre-Luc Dubois. He had a bad year with the Kings. Victor Arvidsson was hurt most of the season. He's now joined the Oilers. And then you had Matt Roy, the defenseman. His loss will certainly hurt their defense, but he offered really nothing offensively. So those numbers are not going to be difficult to replace, even with guys who are not very spectacular offensively, like Warren Fogle, who we got from the Oilers, Tanner Jeannot, and Joel Edmondson on defense. So there's not a lot that needs to be replaced as far as numbers-wise offensively. I mentioned Darcy Kemper coming in. We talk about with Fogle and Jeannot and Edmondson, the Kings are preaching this team needed to get bigger and stronger and grittier. So you could certainly argue that those types of players can do that if that, in fact, is something that the Kings needed to address. Some people believe that that was the case. But I think a lot of the younger players for the Kings are where we're looking for the additions. Quentin Byfield, former first-round pick, made a big leap last year. He's going to get added responsibility, apparently moving from the wing to center, which is his natural position. So hopefully he's more comfortable playing there. Also, you've got Brant Clark, who I think could be the breakout player for the LA Kings this year. Another former first-round pick, had a great year in the AHL last year. He's the most dynamic offensive defenseman the Kings have had since Drew Doughty. So he's looking to come in, fill the shoes of Matt Roy. He can't really do it defensively, but what he does bring offensively hopefully will offset what they lost defensively while he gets up to speed playing defense at the NHL level. So look for Brant Clark to be an impact player, a young player for the LA Kings this year.
Trevor, tell me about the Redwoods the Canucks have signed on defense. They got some big boys back there.
Oh, they love their big boys in Vancouver. You know, I guess with Quinn Hughes, the best defenseman in the NHL, being a little undersized, I think they feel like they need to make up for it in some regard. But obviously, look who they targeted on defense. And you already had Soucy and Myers on this team, who are 6'5" and 6'8", respectively. And then you had Derek Forbort, 6'4", and then, of course, your old boy, Vinny Desharnais, standing at 6'7". So the Canucks defense is big, but it's definitely the biggest weakness on paper heading into the season. I think Adam Foote has his work cut out for him to work miracles again on this defense, but he did it last year. He turned Tyler Myers from a chaotic mess into a respectable top four defenseman. He turned Noah Juleson from an afterthought into a dependable top 6 guy. Nikita Zadorov, Phil Peronik, Carson Suze, they all had great seasons under Adam Foote. So the defense is the biggest question mark, but we'll see if Adam Foote can work his magic. And then up front, the Canucks missed out on Jake Gensel, so they decided to sign the next best Jake in Jake DeBrusk, a guy who has been plagued with inconsistency, but the fancy stat boys love him, and he's going to get a chance to play with a good center for a prolonged period of time for really the first time in his NHL career, aside from a little blip with Patrice Bergeron there. And the Canucks they added wingers coming out the wazoo, man. They got Daniel Sprong, Kiefer Sherwood, Danton Heinen. Oh my God, there's almost too many wingers on this team. But Jake DeBrusk, the big one. I think Daniel Sprong may be the most intriguing one, signed in late July, much like the Canucks did with Pius Suter the summer before. And I think Daniel Sprong, who is buddies with Elias Pettersson, has a chance to make an impact on this team.
I really like all of these moves. You talk about it from a Kings perspective. You're able to get out of Dubois and fill a need in getting Darcy Kemper. Vegas taking really interesting flyers. You mentioned the Olofsson-Eichel connection back in Buffalo. That's the best hockey Olofsson's played in his career. And for the Canucks, you drop a 25-goal guy like DeBrusk on the wing of a Pettersson, a JT Miller, or whoever. You're going to figure it out. That's what you got to do when you're this close. And all of these teams are pretty close. So we are going to take one more quick break. We'll be right back, and we will tackle what exactly we think is going to happen this upcoming season. So stay tuned to this edition of the Locked On NHL Preview. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, today's presenting sponsor. If you want to get in on the action and take what you learned on today's preview episode about the Pacific Division, you saw us talk about the numbers, the Edmonton Oilers at 105.5 points. If you think Connor McDavid is going to lead a team of destiny this year, that might be the team to stake your flag in. If you're like the rest of us and you think that Canucks number is way too low for a team that had 110 points last year, you can get the Canucks over 98.5 standings points on FanDuel right now. And real quick, if you were curious, the Oilers 6-1 to win the Stanley Cup. The Vegas Golden Knights 17-1. The LA Kings 23-1, and the Vancouver Canucks at 24-1 to take home Lord Stanley's Cup. If you want to get in on the action, go visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out listening to today's Pacific Division preview. Gentlemen, it is time to get to the nitty-gritty of it all. I think all 4 of our teams are going to make the playoffs. I do think there are major concerns that all 4 of our teams have. So we'll go reverse order. So Trevor, tell me what goes wrong for the Canucks this year if it doesn't work out.
Well, I think the big question mark with the Canucks right now is definitely on the defense, right? Quinn Hughes and Philip Peronik, you could argue, are both of the 2 best defensemen this franchise has ever seen, which is saying something because they've been around for 54 freaking years. But, Carson Soucy's never been a number 3. Tyler Myers was last season a flash in the radar. Is he actually better? Is he going to revert back to what he was? Again, he is 34 years old. Derek Forward didn't even play 40 games last season. And Vinny D, Nick, I think, he's a fringe guy. I don't know. Should I be excited about Vinny D in Vancouver or should I be worried?
He's good on the penalty kill. He's very good on the penalty kill, but in 5-on-5, it's a bit of an adventure.
Yeah, I did not like what I saw in the playoffs, that's for sure. But again, Adam Foote, he's got to work miracles on this defense. I think this team was one of the best defensive teams in the NHL last season. Not quite, shutting it down Jim Hill or LA Kings style, but they were pretty darn good defensively. But really the big mark on this team is defense and then goaltending, right? Like, is Demko going to be back? When he's back, what kind of version of Thatcher Demko are we going to get? Archer Shilovs was good in the playoffs last year, but this is a guy with 19 games of NHL experience, 10 of them coming in last year's playoffs. So defense and goaltending, the biggest question marks. The other big one is Elias Pettersson. I think that's more so noise than anything else. He had a rough postseason, bad stretch at the end of last season, but he's got over a point a game throughout his NHL career. He's one of the most dynamic players in the game, so I'm not incredibly worried about him. So for you Canucks, that's what could derail them, but not going to lie, I'd be more worried if I was a fan of the LA Kings or Vegas Golden Knights here.
Eddie, why would you be worried about the Kings not making the playoffs this year?
Well, I know we weren't supposed to use injuries in this, but they really don't have any depth at all. If there's any issues with players losing time, the Kings are in big trouble. There's really no one even on the perimeter that's kind of looking to step in and fill a role right now with the Kings. So they're very, very thin. The goaltending, I'm not that concerned about. They've had a rotating door of mediocre goalies over the last 3 seasons, and they've still made the playoffs every year. So I think their team defense is good enough to offset whatever deficiencies they have. In net, to me, it's scoring. It's getting enough scoring. Can guys like Kevin Fiala and Adrian Kempe continue to score at a high rate or even take their scoring up to another level? They're going to probably have to try and win a lot of games low scoring. Obviously, that's not really the direction that the league is going in. So we'll see. And again, young players playing in big situations. Are they ready for it this year? I think eventually guys like Quentin Byfield and Brant Clark will be able to fill that role, but is it going to be this season? Are they ready for it now? Are they ready to be relied on that much right now? So I would say those are the question marks for the Kings, getting enough scoring, and are young players ready for the spotlight?
Chris, I feel like Vegas, it is injuries. I mean, when they're right, they won the Stanley Cup. The year before that, they missed the playoffs. If they're healthy, they're great. But can they be healthy?
I really got to read my emails more often if we're not supposed to talk about health, because that's going to be the number one thing here. I mean, you referenced the injuries. The year they missed it, they had missed the playoffs, tons of injuries. Even the year they won the Stanley Cup, 5 goaltenders, a bunch of other injuries throughout. So if the Golden Knights can be somewhat healthy, that will certainly help. Goaltending, I think, is the next thing. Adin Hill, you're talking a goaltender who still to this day has never had greater than 35 regular season appearances, and he's paid like a starter who should be out there 50 to 55 games. I know it's a tandem league, but when you're making $5 million AAV, you need to be out there for about 45 to 50 games to justify that. Golden Knights without Logan Thompson. Here comes Samsonov. I didn't even talk about Samsonov early in the show because I think that was a key acquisition because, well, he's Samsonov. So we'll leave it at that. Will he be able to fill the void if and when and if Adin Hill is hurt? I don't know. So, yeah, health, goaltending, and then a write-in vote for chemistry, because that's all we heard about last season as to why the Golden Knights did not advance out of the first round against Dallas.
For Edmonton, it's the defense. The goaltending, I think Stuart Skinner has shown enough over the last year and a half to say that he's a middle of the pack to slightly above average NHL starter. So when you're looking at a defense that has one genuinely great pair with Bouchard and Ekholm, and then the other 2 pairs are kind of stapled together and band-aided together and crazy glued together, and you're just hoping that they don't kill your team, I think that's where we're at with Edmonton. If they're going to be able to be seriously competitive, their defense is going to put it together, because we've seen a lot of McDavid, Draisaitl teams derailed by the inability to play even passable NHL level defense. So the one last question we have to tackle before we get out of here today, gentlemen, which of our 4 teams is most likely to fall out of a playoff spot going into this upcoming season? I will cede the floor politely because I don't want to jump on someone yet.
I'll start. The Vegas Golden Knights can reasonably fall out of the playoffs if, for the reasons we talked about, with the health, the goaltending, and chemistry is not going to be an issue, but the health and the goaltending. And, will this be the year the Golden Knights are kind of regrouping? I think the Golden Knights might compete this year, but I think the master plan, if you will, if there is a plan for Vegas, I think the master plan is to get through this season and really go for it again in 25, 26, when there's some additional expiring contracts for the Vegas Golden Knights, and they can take advantage of an increasing salary cap. So I'll start. The Golden Knights can be that team of these 4 that do not qualify for the playoffs.
Well, I will unfortunately say that I believe the LA Kings are the most likely to fall out if there is one of these teams to fall out, although I would pick all 4 of our teams to make the playoffs. But again, very thin. The additions they made, not dynamic. They're kind of relying on hoping that, they can establish an identity, be grittier, be tougher, be more physical, and that's somehow going to carry the day and get them to where they haven't been over the last few years, where, of course, is good enough to get in the playoffs, but then good enough not to do anything after that. They're asking a lot of some young guys to step up and fill some key roles. Are they ready? And they got a new head coach. And yes, he was the interim coach last year, but when he comes in that situation, he doesn't have a chance to really make his changes. Now he's going to have training camp. He's going to have the preseason. What is he going to do that's going to be different from what they've had before? Because again, it's great to make the playoffs 3 years in a row, but it's not great to be out 3 years in a row. And they want something different. What's he going to do differently to get this team over the hump? Can he do anything differently to get this team over the hump? And can he implement it fast enough to where it's going to make an impact right away? They start the season on a 7-game road trip as well. So it's going to need to be right away, and it's going to need to be away from home.
The question I have for you, Eddie, real quick off of that, do you think it's somebody from the Pacific that jumps them, or do you think they're in the wild card mix and it's someone from the Central you'd be worried about?
It's a good question. I think I could see the Kings being realistically probably the 8th seed, the last team in. If I was going to look at somebody, maybe a Seattle, Dan Bilesman takes over. There's some new energy there, bringing in guys like Chandler Stevenson coming in as well. So a couple of additions, maybe, Matty Beniers takes a step back up to where he was his rookie year. So I would say maybe Seattle would be the team I'd pick.
Trevor?
Man, oh man. So I think I got to pick on either Chris or Eddie here, the Knights or the LA Kings. And I think if I'm going to pick one of these two teams to miss the playoffs, I'm probably picking the Vegas Golden Knights. I think there's arguments for both you guys, but look, I see with the Vegas Golden Knights, a team that lost 2 top 6 guys this offseason in Stevenson and, oh my God, I'm forgetting the other guy. Marchessault, of course. And Mustard Salt. William Carey, Michael Amadio, Anthony Mantha, some serviceable bottom 6 guys. And again, not a lot replacing them, right? You got, when I hear, Victor Olofsson, bringing back Olofsson and Eichel to, get back that Buffalo Sabres magic.
That worked really well in Buffalo. Worked great in Buffalo. They had great results there.
I heard that about Connor Brown when he joined the Oilers, by the way. It's Connor McDavid's old buddy. And
it took Connor Brown 88 games to start looking like a professional hockey player again.
It worked when McDavid found his old junior coach, so what the heck, right? Why not?
Hey, whatever you can do.
Bring the boys back. There you go. So I'm probably picking Vegas to miss the playoffs out of all of them. I also see on defense too, Pietrangelo, maybe not quite the same dominant force he was. So a lot of missing pieces in Vegas, not a lot to replace them. You mix in Mark Stone missing a ton of time each season. I'd be worried if I was the Vegas Golden Knights, although I think the Kings got some reason to worry as well.
So I'll round us out, and I will agree with what you just said, Trevor. The one thing I will say in defense of both of these teams, I think Vegas has a higher ceiling, but I think the Kings probably have a higher floor because the way the Kings play, the way their roster set up, they're reasonably safe, whereas Vegas, 2 injuries, and that team's entirely derailed. I mean, they kind of they limped into the playoffs last year against Dallas.
LTIR.
I mean, it's a valid concern. They're a well put together team, but they have no margin for error. I think the Kings, even though they're not as high end talent wise, they have a little bit more depth. If I had to pick one, I would probably say Vegas just because I've seen it. The injuries do accumulate and they are depending a lot on guys like Holtz and Olofsson to really kind of carry a load for them. And if it comes down to that, I trust Kopitar, I trust Kempe, I trust Fiala, I trust Doughty, frankly, a little bit more. But that will just about do it for today's show. So thank you for making this episode of the Locked On NHL 2024 season preview your first listen today. For your second listen, catch the rest of the Pacific Division in every episode of the Locked On NHL season preview on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.